I knew I would have to watch it today as to who was here for the children's story, because all the Pathfinders are away, and that takes families and that takes the younger children as well. So I have 3 children, and one of the reasons why I had to be careful on this, because the story I have for you today is an adult story that I was either going to get down on my hands and knees and make like a child, or tell it as to the adults as well as the children, and that's what we're going to do. So kids, I hope you find this story helpful as we tell you the story, and it's a very interesting story. It's a story about a boy by the name of John. Well, that's how he started anyway. He was just known as, sorry, just turn this on. He was just known as John, all right? And John, at the age of, would you believe, 11, went to sea with his father. Now, this sounds very much like the last story I told you, doesn't it? But it is a little bit different, quite a bit different, actually. And so here is John, who grew up in a home with mum and dad. Unfortunately, when John was 7, he died. Sorry. That again. Unfortunately, when John was 7, mum died. And mum was the spiritual one in the family. Dad wasn't a Christian. And so John now is left with his dad to try and put into practice the things that his mother had taught to him up to the age of 7. How old are you? 7? Yeah, how about that? So he's just your age when he lost his mother. Sad, isn't it? And so when he got to the age of 11, his father said to him, how about you come with me on one of our journeys at sea? So he said, all right, yeah, he was happy to get out of school for a while. And so he went with Dad. Now remember that this story is 300 years ago. In fact, he was born in the year 1725, exactly 300 years ago. And so here he is now, heading out to sea with Dad, and they were selling produce from one country to another country, buying and selling and travelling around in this way. So that was all good for John. He enjoyed that. And Dad kept taking him out every now and again. He didn't take him out of school all the time, but every now and again he'd take him out and off they'd go for another journey at sea. John noticed about when he got to the age of 17, which is when he left school and decided it was time to get work himself, he noticed that Dad was into some trading that wasn't good. All right? And he just was keeping an eye on that. But the sad thing was that one of the things, while John was getting a lot of experience at sea as to how to be a good seaman, he was also unfortunately learning a lot of things he shouldn't have been learning. His dad didn't care too much because he wasn't a Christian. John started swearing, he started smoking, he started drinking, and he lived a terrible life. And at the age of 17, when he left school, he actually joined up with some other companies to start trading and sailing around the oceans from England. That was where his home was. Well, one of the interesting things about John was this. While he was working for some of these other companies, his dad actually got him a better job, and it was over in Jamaica. But it was working with slaves, and he wasn't quite sure whether that's what he wanted. So he decided that what he would do is that he would go and visit his girlfriend Mary, this is at home, and be late getting back and miss the ship, and therefore he wouldn't have to go to Jamaica. Well, that worked. But what didn't work was that he got caught by what was called a press gang. Now, let me tell you what a press gang is. A press gang was usually one officer from the government or from the Navy, it could have been. And in addition to that, they would have a lot of ruffians, and they'd go out into the community getting people to join the Navy. Do you know what the Navy is for? That's the government military service on the water, isn't it? In the boats. And so he was actually pressed into becoming a sailor for the Navy. That was worse than he had ever had at sea. Because, first of all, the company was terrible, the conditions were terrible, and he really, at that stage, he was getting angry with God for letting him get into this. But after all, he'd even left God. So his mind was in a dilemma about, does God look after me? or not. And so he was taken by this that gang, and then eventually he found an opportunity because he was sent with a group of sailors to buy supplies while they were in port, and he thought, this is my chance to escape. So he escaped, but his escape was very short-lived. They caught him, and while he was deserting the Navy, meaning he was leaving the Navy without permission, they caught him and they took him and gave him a public flogging before all the people in the town. What a terrible thing. Do you think he learned some lessons from this? Do you think after this he thought, well, maybe I'll worship God properly. I'll serve God better? Well, his life was one of on again, off again, as far as his relationship with God was concerned. And what we notice now is that John went back and worked for the Navy for a very short period of time when he was able to officially get leave, and he joined up with another company. Now this time, he's now at Liverpool in England. This is on the west coast of England. And we're finding now that he is travelling out of Liverpool on a ship to different projects, going to different places. And the boat that you see there was pretty typical of the size of the boat that he used to get aboard and head off there to other parts around the world. As I said before, one of the things that he was starting to get involved with through these companies was the program of slavery. It was a terrible program. For example, here is a picture showing the captain of the ship and somebody supervising these just small handful of slaves shown in this picture, but there probably are hundreds of slaves who are forced on board down into the bottom of the boat, and they have to wait there until they get to the place where they then are sold to people, farmers, etc., as slaves. One of the things that John noticed that was happening was that the slave ship would first of all fill up with produce and things that people would like in countries like Africa where they were catching the slaves. And they would go down to Africa and they would then get these people who would catch the slaves, their own people, bring them to the port and swap the slaves for the produce that they were carting on board the ship. Well, John was kind of feeling, oh, that's not too bad, I guess. They're helping the people in Africa with goods. But then once those slaves were on board the ship, guess where they were taken? They were taken to places like America. And that's where they were sold to work for the farmers or wherever under very poor and harsh conditions. Now, this continued for the rest of the rest of his life while he was at sea, because by about the age of 40, he did experience a conversion. But before he experienced that conversion, John at sea had a pretty rough life, even though he became captain of ships himself, captain of slave ships that would get on board a whole 100, 200 slaves and take them across to America or other parts of the world and sell them. That's what he was doing for many years in his life, but he just realised that there was something wrong about what he was doing. And he realised that it was different than what he was being told about in from when he was a child, for example, and his experiences that he did have with God. And so eventually, one night at sea, and we'll cut the story short about this point, one night while he was at sea, a huge storm blew up. And this ship was almost empty by this stage, and it was on its way back to Ireland. And just out of Ireland, he thought the ship was going to break and come apart. He spent the rest of the night bailing out water. But while he was bailing, he started to pray pretty earnestly. And it wasn't very long before John, and fortunately they were saved from that storm. They didn't go down. They could have been, but they didn't go down. And from that point onwards, even though John still struggled back and forward in his relationship with God, because he always said, how can God forgive a sinner like me? I've done these terrible things to these people. I've been a blasphemer against God. I've given God a chance and then I turn my back on him. How can God keep giving me chances? He said, God is not a good God, is he? And then finally, John gave his heart completely to God and he never turned back, and he left left the shipping business and the slavery business, got a job on land for a while, and during that time he began to prepare himself to become a minister. And he became a minister in a little church at a place called Olney in England, and then later in Woolworth, right in the heart of London. He became one of the most powerful ministers during this time. And one of the things he did was he wrote a hymn that we sing more than probably any other hymn. Do you know what the hymn is? Amazing Grace. All right, and there's a couple of verses up there of that hymn, and in fact in a minute we're going to even sing the hymn because it's a reminder to us, look, we are very undeserving of God's gift of salvation, but by coming to God and asking for forgiveness and accepting his gift of salvation, we are assured that we have eternal life. So it's a great story, isn't it? About how we can continue in our relationship with God and how that we continue to really be somebody who is saved by God's grace. Okay, now, the group are going to come up and sing Amazing Grace. Do you want to come up and sing with them? No? The girls want to come up and sing today? No, okay then. All right. Let's all join in and sing with them, Amazing Grace. And remember, this is right up the theme of Robert's sermon for us today, how that God has given us a gift of salvation and his graciousness is beyond anything that we can do or really appreciate.